So we're going to be using this worksheet to learn from because it is very simple and very clear, I think. So I guess we'll start from the very first thing, which is the cube section. So we're going to draw 3 cubes, just like how there is in the worksheet. When I draw a cube, I just start with the intersecting line in the middle, like this. By the way, I'm using my 5H pencil, the lightest one that we have for the sketching. So I start with the line right here, and then I make a very flat V that comes up. Each side is relatively the same. And then from each side of the V, I will make parallel lines to the middle, but slightly higher up. I mean, slightly taller. Then I will connect these lines like this. This one's a bit slanted. And the lines here that I connected with will be parallel to the V lines here. And then above, I'll put a point right about here, and then I'll just connect it from the top. This one should be a bit higher. So yeah, that is how I make a cube. And I'm going to make 3 cubes like the worksheet. So here I have my 3 cubes. They are all a little bit different, but that's alright. So when we're gonna start with the middle cube, just like the worksheet says. So when you look at this cube, the first thing you should ask is, where is the light coming from? So from here we can see that it's coming from overhead, but it's more skewed to this side. So I'll just mark it here. It's more skewed towards here because you can see that it's most illuminated up here. Then there's a middle tone on this side, and then it casts a darker shadow on this side. So we're gonna start with the top panel of the cube, the lightest part. Now, even though it looks like it's all one tone, there's a slight gradient that is going on here. As you can see, it's split into 3 sections. So I'm gonna very lightly split it into 3 sections. Now you can see the absolute lightest part of the panel will be right here, and it'll be pretty much white. Then there will be a medium tone, and then here will be the darkest, even though it will still be very light. So with my 5H pencil, I'm going, well, first I'll outline it here a bit so I know what I'm doing. But with my 5H pencil, I'm going to lightly shade the middle. Like this. I'm not going to press hard on it, it'll just be very light. And then on this section, I'm still using my 5H pencil, but I'm just going to slightly put a little bit more pressure so it's just slightly darker than that middle section. There shouldn't be too much of a contrast between this. Now for this side of the cube, it's also split into 3 sections. So I'm going to take my 5B, take my 5H, and I'm going to diagonally split it into these 3 sections. And actually, in the sections that this side is split into is also parallel. So I'm just gonna, while I'm here, I'll just put that as well. So now you can see that it's a medium tone that is different from this extremely light tone. I'm going to take my 3H pencil that has slightly more pigment than the 5H, and I'm going to start shading. I'll start from here. I'm not going to be pressing hard. I'm just going to lightly shade it here with my 3H. And then it will gradually get lighter here. So I'll just apply it a bit less pressure, but still more than the top panel. She'll give it another layer here. Then in this section, finally, I'll just go very light with my 3H. Now I'm going to take my HB for this shadowy panel. Now here here will be the darkest part. I'm just outlining this line here. Then again with this one, I'll be going slightly less dark than that corner. I'm actually gonna just darken this slightly and press a bit harder. Then I'm going to, for this one, I'm going to just go slightly less dark than this section. I'm pressing very lightly here. Okay, so this is just mapping out the different shadows on this cube. So here we mapped out the light and the shadows on this cube, and we really brought it to life from this. Now for the third cube, we will be going all the way with it and doing it without these guidelines, but we can imagine that they are there. So again, I'm going to start with my 5H and do the top. I'm remembering that here it is dark, it's slightly darker, and then it goes to white. I noticed that in the final, this edge here is kind of highlighted with the shading. And then you can see now that this corner here is the darkest part of this panel. I'm just gonna lightly transition into a lighter shading by pressing dark here, and then as I go further out, I press lighter. And then I keep using less pressure until it gets to pretty much just white as I go here. I see that there's a slight shading here since the light does come from here and it's darker here, but it's very subtle. Then for this panel, I'm going to use my 3H. And I'm going to remember the mapping here, how since the light is coming from here, it will be darker on this side, and this edge will be the darkest part. So it's pretty much dark in this section here. I mean the darkest that I will go with the 3H. And then I slowly relieve pressure off the pencil as it gets lighter. And I try to fade it out like this. And then here at the bottom, just like with the mapping, it is lighter. And I noticed that in the reference the edge is a bit shaded more here, so I'll just add that very, very subtly. And then here for this panel I'll use the HB again. And when I remember the mapping and I look at the reference, I see that this part will probably be the darkest, and then it will transition to less dark as you go this way, because the shadow is being casted right here on this edge. That's why it's the darkest. I'm gonna take my HB and I'm just gonna highlight this part here. I feel like I didn't add enough contrast with the other pencil, so I'm just going to put a little bit here on the darker sides. Anyways. And then I fade out from the darkest parts as I go here. And then this edge is also a bit shaded in the reference. I'm also gonna shade this edge in too. So now we went from here to much more defined, realistic look. Now we also have to add the shadow. I'm going to take my 5B just to sketch where the shadow will be. So when you draw a shadow, it's always going to be at its darkest when it's closest to the object, and then it will fade into getting lighter and lighter until the shadow fades out. So let's just say the shadow will be here. The darkest part of the shadow is going to be right here, and then it will fade out and disperse. So for this shadow, I think I'm just going to go with my 5H, just to be on the safe side and not do it too dark. I'm going to press the hardest here with it. The shadow also wraps around the cube and goes here. I see that I need to make the shadow a bit darker, so I'm just going to go in with my 3H, and just at the base I'm going to define it more. just defining the edges here of the cube. And if I see that there needs to be a bit more contrast, I'm using my 3H. If I see that there's a bit more contrast here, I can just re-add it, because sometimes when you put your hand over it, it kind of smudges it out. So I'm just going to lightly, with my 3H, just shade in some of the dark areas here too. It's always better to accidentally go too light than too dark. That's why sometimes when you see a lot of my drawings, I do it very lightly at first and then I have to go in and darken it later. I just do it too lightly to be on the safer side, because it's much harder if you accidentally make it too dark. I'm barely even touching it up here. So now we did the square. Let's go with the circle now, which will be much easier to draw. I'm going to go in with my 5H like I do for sketching. And the circle does not need to be a perfect circle. If it's hard to draw a perfect circle, you can always just trace one from an object like this, or something smaller than that, but I'm just going to do a very rough circle that is probably not going to be perfect. Okay, so my eraser stained my paper, but it's fine. So when we see the circle, let's find where the light is coming from, of course. This way, just like the other one. Now we can see the top point of the circle is highlighted for us. It would be about right here. And so I'm just going to put a line down the middle. It won't be a straight line, it will be slightly curved. Like this. And then I'm going to split that in half here. I'm going to go slightly curved with my 5H, of course. And then I'll split this one in half here too. And here they did a tiny line. Here the other two sides, they're just tiny splits right there. So then they split them into around 6 sections from above. So I'm just going to make 5 lines coming from each side. They did theirs more angular. I'm just going to do it straight. It's not exactly like the reference, but it will still be fine. I don't think the number of squares or the size of them really matters. It just kind of shows you where things will go. So on this section, they will be pretty much white up here. maybe some light shadowing right here. Since the light is coming from up here, there will be a very slight shading around this section. It will be almost too small to see. And then as you get lower, it will be a bit darker. Then on this row, these two seem to be very light as well. And then once you get here, you shade it in. And then here will be even darker than these two. Actually, with these ones, I'll use my 3H so I don't have to press as hard. My eraser isn't like the eraser stain, I guess, isn't messing it up a bit. But since it's just a mapping out portion, I don't really mind. And then here, it goes a bit lighter at the bottom. So then here, this tone will be up here. And then also here, these triangles up here, this one is getting shaded in as well. Right here, right here I use the same tone here as I did in this square, as we are moving to the darker side. Then here is going to be the darkest square of the entire mapping. I think because the shadow will be casted the most around here. So its darkest point will be here. I might use HB for it. Just so I don't have to press that hard. And then these here are roughly the same shade. This one's just slightly darker. And then for this side, it won't be as dark as here, but these will be roughly the same shade. And then here, the square will be a bit darker. And then here will actually get lighter as we go down, since there will be a slight reflection here at the bottom. So this kind of just helps you map out where things will be. And now, without using the guide, we will do it on the third square. Now remember to always just start with the lightest pencil and go at your lightest point. I see here, I can see a big highlight right here. That is where the lightest points will be. And then I see right underneath, here is where the darkest point is going to be. So with my lightest point starting around it, I'm just going to lightly shade. And then as I move away from this circle, I'm going to start pressing harder with my 5H. And then this top section of the circle will be roughly like the same shade. Then I'm taking my 3H, and then I will go darker around here. And I'm going in with my HB right here, and I'm going to slowly make that transition from these medium parts to the darkest part, which will be right here. It also will come around here, these dark parts, but very subtly. Now that I'm looking at it, I see that I made these light parts here too dark, but I guess this is a good time I can show using the kneadable eraser. So with a kneadable eraser, you can mold it into whatever shape you want. For me, I'm gonna try with a point, since I'm doing a very small area, and my other eraser is staining my paper. Another thing, if you added too much pigment in your drawing, you can just go like this and press on it. I'm going to use my blender to really smoothen it out. So now, of course, we're going to do the shadow. With my 5H, I'm just going to mark where it is. It's around here. The darkest part of the shadow will be within here. Then it will fade out. I'm using the HB for the darkest part of the shadow. Something that people do with their shadows is they like to use the blender for a more faded effect as they go more and more out of it. I mean, as the shadow stretches and disperses, they use the blender to kind of show that gradient. I think the circle is definitely the hardest one out of all of the shapes because there are no edges to the circle, so it's harder to map out. But these last two shapes are easier, luckily. So when I do the cylinder is just an oval. Trying to make it even. An oval, and then from the very edge of each side, 2 straight lines. And then a curve that is parallel to this one. I think I made mine a bit too wide, so for the middle one I'm going to make it more narrow like the original. Now with this, then 2 parallel straight lines in the middle. And then make a line this parallel this one. Okay, so I'm just going to make some more here, So the cylinder is much easier. It is just straight lines. The top here seems to be pretty much just light in the mapping out. And then the lines here, there are 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So again, the light seems to be coming from, not really from here, but from this side. It's hard to show with the 2D object, but not behind, but in front, around right here is where the light seems to be shining. So with my 5H, this part seems to be the lightest, so they went over it very lightly, almost white. Here, it's just slightly darker. Then with my 3H, here will be a bit darker than those. then right here will be the darkest point where the shadow is casted. Actually, I'm going to use my HB for this one. And then here, this one will this one will be around the same shade as here. So this is how you map out a cylinder. Now, when we get to the cylinder, the actual shading of it, the top in the reference is actually slightly shaded right here, because I guess if the light is coming from in front right here, there'll be a light shading right here. Oh, by the way, my 5H. Now, so again, I'll use my 5H and I'll start from the very lightest part here of the cylinder, which will be right here. And then the darkest shadow, just like the mapping, will be right here. So the lightest part is not pure white, so I'm just shading it extremely lightly. And then I'm gonna just go in an up and down motion. And then around it, I start pressing harder. Then I take my 3H. Now I'll be using my HB here to do this line here. It seems like it's more shaded in. I mean this edge, sorry. Here will be the darkest point. So I'm going to remember that. I see that I should define the shading here a bit more. I'm doing it very lightly. Now for the middle, I'm actually going to go in with my 5B. My 3B. I know I didn't really use the B's yet, but I guess this is a good time since it seems like it'll be much darker here. You can see it's very pigmented. Wow, that's very, very rich. Okay, now for the shadow. The shadow seems a bit darker on this one, so I'm just going to go in with my HB. I'm going to extremely lightly show where my shadow is. The darkest part of my shadow will be right here, and then the shadow wraps around the cylinder. And I liked that use of the blender to make the shadow for this one. I'll do it for here as well. Oops. I accidentally added it here, so I'm using my blender and I'm just picking it up. That's good. Alright, so now we have 3 shapes that we have. There we go. Now the last one is the cone. The last one is the cone that we will do. The cone is very easy. It's very similar to the cylinder. And with my 5H to sketch it out, I will start here with a very simple cone, a very half triangle. Like this. This is another eraser stain from that white one, so it's okay. The cone is just half of a triangle here. If you want to make it more symmetrical, you can try putting a line down the middle to make sure both sides are equal, but I'll just do it roughly here. And then a grid line, like that, kind of like a watermelon slice. Okay, so this one just split into, split with 4 lines. So I'll put, actually there is one line down the middle, so one down the middle, and then I'll split each half into 4ths, like this. So, as with the last one, the light is coming from the front around this side. So here will be the most light. You can see it's kind of a gradient where the shading starts here, and then it gets a bit lighter up here, nearly white. Then with the 3H pencil. Where is it? I will lightly go and shade right here. And I'll use that same tone here, just slightly darker. Actually, there's supposed to be a little sliver here. Forgot about that. But anyways, right here will be pretty much the same as this, just slightly darker. Now I'm going to be using my HB right for the darkest part here. Then right here will be nearly as dark as this one, but not all the way. Okay, so we'll be using the same exact mapping for the shading. Again, starting with my 5H here. I'll mark where the lightest part will be, which is right here, just like the mapping. The darkest part will be right here. Yeah. Going in with my 3H around the light part. My HB. Now I'm going to, since we're using the B's now, I'm using my 3B pencil for the darkest part of the drawing. going to use my eraser to make the top less contrasting, I guess. I'm also going to add that little, very slightly, just that reflection right here on the side. I'm gonna use my blender. Actually, I should have used my blender for this as well. Just gonna smooth it out. I always start from the lightest part and go into the darkest part with the blender. I'm gonna add more of a light right here. Something like this. Going to use HB for my shadow. Actually, once again, I'm going to lighten this area here. I can also use this eraser to help fade out the shadows like this. If I accidentally make them too long. I hope this was a helpful demonstration of how to use the different pencils and the blender and how to shade. If you need help with it, you can ask me anything. Okay.